Hello, I'm Nate, aka B-Tier Mutineer, and today, as part of my B-Tier guides for Dragon Age Origins Awakening, I'm going to take you through the build I recommend for Velanna. This is a short-range, extremely aggressive damager build that makes the most out of Velanna's Dalish Keeper magic and leans into her fiery personality and strong desire for vengeance. This will be a bit more complex in terms of abilities and tactics and is best used manually, so do be warned. You will be able to set it up to some extent for Velanna to use it by herself, but it will not be as strong as if you micromanage her since there's just not enough tactics slots. But I'll explain everything you need to know about that in the tactics section. Before we get into the build, I'll take a moment to say a special thank you to my members. I appreciate all of you so much, and your support allows me to keep going. Joining as a member would help the channel a lot, but of course only do so if you want to and if you can afford it. I'm always grateful, even if you just like the video if you enjoyed it, and maybe leave a comment. Back to the guide. First, I have a few mods I always recommend. If you've watched my previous Awakening guides, you already know what these are, so you can skip to the next section, but I'm mentioning them in each guide for anyone who's new to the guides. Dane's Fixes is the most important mod that fixes a ton of bugs related to combat and implements missing item properties. It has a lot of extra quality of life improvements and balance adjustments, but it's completely modular, so you can just copy the parts of it you want and ignore the rest. If you use Dane's Fixes, I also recommend more detailed tooltips because it adds more detailed descriptions for all the abilities and item properties in the game. Also related to combat, Advanced Tactics. This mod fixes issues with follower AI and implements more options to choose from in the tactics menu. Having access to these extra conditions for your companion's tactics will help you set up tactics far more comfortably. Finally, Respecification DAO allows you to respecialize your characters. While in Awakening you can do this with a special item called Tome of Focus, the mod is better because you can respecialize your Warden from Origins before you import them into Awakening, which you may feel like you have to do if your build from DAO isn't very good. Tomes of Focus are only available after you complete the first mission of Awakening, so if you think your Warden is weak, I definitely recommend respecializing them with the mod. But the mod also allows you to do a partial respecialization, meaning attribute and ability points are reset, but the character keeps any specializations they already have. This is good if you haven't yet played Awakening because you won't have the new specializations available from the start, and if you use a Tome of Focus, it will remove all specializations from a companion. That means you wouldn't be able to unlock the new specialization the companion already had until you buy the required specialization tome. With that out of the way, let's get into the build. This will be a short-range damager build focused on dealing lots of damage with elemental and keeper spells, but it also has spells that disable enemies or debuff their stats. While Velanna will want to be very close to enemies, this is not an arcane warrior build, so you will still only use regular mage equipment, aka staves and cloth armor. When you recruit her, Velanna has the following skills unlocked: rank 2 of Herbalism and rank 2 of Combat Tactics. Herbalism is nice to have to craft health poultices, stamina drafts, and lyrium potions. You can also craft utility or defensive consumables if you feel like you need them, but they're extremely rarely needed. On easy or normal, you should be fine with the health, stamina, and lyrium potions you get as loot, but on hard or nightmare you might need to craft some, since less potions will drop, especially health poultices. Velanna is the best companion to max out Herbalism on because she already starts with rank 2, and I do recommend maxing it out because you'll be able to craft a Master Lyrium Potion that you need for Master Weight to craft the Golem Shell armor, one of the best massive chess pieces in the game. Combat Tactics is a great skill for mages because it grants extra tactic slots, and you absolutely need those for any mage to be able to properly set up their tactics so they can be effective on their own without being manually controlled by you. So it's perfect that Velanna already has 2 ranks of this. You'll want to max it out, but it's great to start with 2 ranks already unlocked. It's weird that she doesn't have any points towards combat training and that she only has 4 total skill points used when you recruit her, but you should be able to use the unused skill points after recruiting her. Velanna has the following starting abilities. From the Arcane tree, Arcane Bolt. Arcane Bolt shoots a spirit damage bolt at a single target. It has a very long range, a small mana cost, and a short cooldown. While this is nice cheap damage, since Velanna's build is going to be focused on short range damage, you don't need this. If you respecialize Velanna, don't unlock it. From the Primal tree, Flame Blast, Flaming Weapons, Fireball, Inferno, Rock Armor, and Stone Fist. Flame Blast deals fire damage to enemies in a cone in front of the caster. Fire is amazing against Darkspawn and Undead. But while this is a good short-range spell, Velanna has even better ones in her build, so this will likely not be used often. Flaming Weapons is a sustained spell that adds fire damage to all the melee weapons in the party. This provides great support for your party to enhance their damage against most enemies other than those who are immune to fire. But you may not find it useful if you only have one melee character in the party, since only melee weapons are enchanted. Fireball deals fire damage to all creatures in a large area and has a chance to knock them down. Be careful, because this will deal friendly fire and can knock down your allies, so I recommend only casting it if your allies aren't in the radius, or if you know they're immune to knockdowns or have high physical resistance. Inferno deals fire damage over time to all creatures in an area. Just like with Fireball, it's best to use when your allies aren't in the radius. Because Inferno has a longer conjuration time, 2 seconds, I don't recommend using it. You have far better AoE damage spells like Fireball and other spells from the recommended abilities, so if you respecialize Velanna, don't unlock this. Rock Armor is a sustained spell that increases the caster's armor. Since Velanna will be quite close to enemies, it's great to reduce damage taken from physical attacks. Stone Fist deals physical damage to a target from afar and has a chance to knock them down. It can also be used to shatter frozen or petrified enemies, so it's great to use if you have a second mage using cold spells. Even without shattering though, the damage is decent and the possible knockdown is a plus. From the creation tree, Heal. Heal restores the health of an ally within range for a moderate amount, minimum 40% of their max HP. The healing is based on your mage's spell power, but you can also increase the effectiveness by increasing the magic score of your other allies by a few points. From the spirit tree, Walking Bomb and Mind Blast. Walking Bomb magically infects a target, dealing spirit damage to it over the next 20 seconds. If the target dies while the effect is still active, it explodes, dealing physical damage to all nearby targets, including your allies, though your party only takes half damage. Shattering an enemy affected by Walking Bomb causes them to explode immediately. This is a strong spell, but unfortunately in Awakening, there's other area spells dealing physical damage that isn't mitigated by armor from the Keeper specialization, which makes Walking Bomb far less impressive. It's fine and all, but not really needed for this build, so you can skip it if you respecialize Velanna. Mind Blast stuns enemies in an area around the caster. This is an amazing spell to have both defensively and offensively, since it can save you from enemies attacking your mage, or you can also go forward into an enemy group to stun them so they're easier to kill. From the Entropy tree, Vulnerability Hex, Affliction Hex, Misdirection Hex, Drain Life, Death Magic, and Curse of Mortality. Vulnerability Hex reduces the target's elemental resistances and mental resistance. This is best used if you want to make an elite or boss enemy vulnerable to the elemental damage your party uses, so they're easier to kill. If your mage has very high spell power, you can even reach the cap of minus 100% resistance, meaning that enemy will take double damage from that particular element. But if an enemy has true immunity to an element, you can't bypass their immunity with this penalty. So you still can't damage the Inferno Golem with fire, for example. Affliction Hex reduces the target's elemental resistances, but also reduces the elemental resistances of all enemies near the initial target. Be careful who you cast this on, because the Hex's aura will only last as long as the initial target is alive. The penalties stack with Vulnerability Hex, as well as with itself if you cast Affliction Hex on multiple targets. At a high level, like throughout all of Awakening, this isn't really needed when fighting groups of normal enemies. They die very easily. So I only recommend using this to debuff a boss enemy's resistances together with Vulnerability Hex, or as an alternate Hex to use if Vulnerability Hex is on cooldown. Misdirection Hex causes one enemy to miss all of its regular attacks, and their critical hits become normal hits. Note that this doesn't affect special abilities that don't have an attack roll, like Ram, Grab, Overwhelm, or Scattershot. I don't find this hex particularly useful because it only affects a single enemy and only debuffs their attacks. It's much easier to just disable them or straight up kill them instead. But since I recommend picking up Death Hex later on, you can keep this even if you respecialize Velanna. Drain Life deals spirit damage to a target and heals the caster for the same amount. You can cause the improved Drain spell combo if you cast Vulnerability Hex on the enemy and then Drain Life, causing the spell to deal extra damage and heal for more. This is great for a regular mage to keep them topped up on health, but since I will later recommend using Blood Magic, any healing effects received while Blood Magic is active are reduced. So this becomes quite useless. So I don't recommend using it, though the other spells in this row are nice to have. Death Magic is a sustained spell that consumes nearby enemy corpses to heal the caster. Velanna will often be surrounded by enemy corpses due to her killing enemies near her with various AoE spells, so it's nice to have. However, once you start using the Keeper spell One with Nature, or Blood Magic, you won't really want to use this anymore because the Keeper spell also consumes corpses, and with Blood Magic the healing from Death Magic doesn't matter. Curse of Mortality curses a target to take continuous spirit damage and makes them completely unable to heal. This is amazing to use on enemy spellcasters, either ones who have heal or blood mages who can use blood sacrifice on their allies to heal themselves. Under the effects of this curse, any enemy that can heal itself will suddenly become far weaker and be much easier to kill. There are other potential targets for this spell, like Shades who can use the Drain Life spell, but the enemy mages are the highest priority. Velanna has the Keeper specialization unlocked, which grants +2 magic and +3 mental resistance. Magic bonuses are always great, the mental resistance doesn't really matter, but then again, these are tiny bonuses regardless, and the abilities you get access to are far more important. She starts with One with Nature unlocked. One with Nature is a sustained that immobilizes the mage while it's active, but deals nature damage every 2 seconds and inflicts a 40% movement speed penalty to any enemy in a 5-meter radius. The mage is also immune to knockdown and slip effects due to being immobilized. Unlike other field spells from Awakening, this one doesn't cost mana when it damages enemies, nor does it reduce your mana regen. But nature damage isn't the best type since many enemies are resistant or immune to it. As long as they aren't immune though, you can use Vulnerability or Affliction Hex to reduce their nature resistance to deal more damage. But you really don't need to worry much about the nature damage of One with Nature, because the main reason to use this is to get access to the other 2 great damaging spells from the Keeper specialization, which deal physical damage that is not possible to mitigate with armor. It's best to combine One with Nature with spells like Miasma to debuff enemies further and draw more threat, so more enemies are drawn into your area of effect. Overall, Velanna has very nice starting spells, focusing mainly on Fire, Earth, and Entropy. In all honesty, she could have skipped Arcane Bolt and Walking Bomb and used those 2 points to unlock more spells from Entropy, but that's nitpicking and you can respecialize her anyway. If you respecialize Velanna, I recommend removing Arcane Bolt, Walking Bomb, and Inferno. We'll talk about the spells I recommend unlocking a bit later. Moving on, Velanna's starting gear is decent. Pretty good for a basic mage, but not quite good enough for a short-range blood mage. Heart of the Forest is a tier 7 cold staff that grants +6 willpower, +2 combat mana regen, +6 spell power, and +10% fire damage. The bonuses are nice, but it's weird that the staff's basic attacks deal cold damage instead of fire. Still, it's perfectly fine to use until you can buy or loot a better staff. Skins of the Keeper are robes that grant +1 to all attributes, +6 defense, and +6 spell power. A bonus to armor would be better, and especially bonuses to health or constitution would be nice for blood magic purposes. But you'll see there aren't too many good mage robes available, so you'll have to use whatever you can. Pocketed Searing Gloves are tier 4 mage gloves that grant +10% fire damage. They're alright, but I recommend replacing these with gloves that have a higher bonus to fire damage or ones that increase spirit damage. Imperial Weavers are mage boots that grant +10% dodge chance. I would replace these with boots that grant bonuses to armor, constitution, or health, but there's only one such pair of boots in the game. Earthen Cinch is a belt that grants +1 armor and +5% nature damage. Other than One with Nature, no spells in Velanna's build deal nature damage. In fact, barely any spells at all deal nature damage. Plus, the bonus is tiny, so it doesn't matter. The +1 to armor isn't significant enough either, so replace this ASAP. Hollahorn is an amulet that grants +10 mental resistance. Utterly useless, replace it ASAP. Keeper's Charm is Velanna's unique ring, restricted to her, granting +2 willpower, +2 magic, and +5% fire damage. It's a decent mage ring, but not anything special. It can provide a set bonus of +2 combat health regeneration when paired with a golden cog ring. The set bonus isn't good enough though, so I don't recommend equipping these rings together. Only use Keeper's Charm if you want to keep it for role-playing reasons, otherwise there are far better mage rings for Velanna. Ring of Study is a ring that grants +1 magic. This ring is a joke, that's basically nothing, replace it ASAP. Let's talk about recommended attributes. This build is a blood mage build, so Velanna wants to use health as her spellcasting resource, especially once she has an item that grants the improves blood magic bonus, so all spells cost 25% less health. But also because Draining Aura is a sustained spell which drains the caster's mana whenever it damages enemies, so it's an extra reason to keep Velanna's mana pool alone and cast your spells with health instead. The attribute spread I recommend is 2 points into magic and 1 point into constitution whenever you level up. If you respecialize Velanna, I do recommend spending some points into willpower until it's at a base score between 20 and 25 because you need a decent mana pool for your sustained spells. Plus, remember to put a few points into cunning until it reaches a base of 16 so that Velanna can max out the combat tactics skill. Magic allows you to unlock higher tier spells, and more importantly, it increases your spell power, which affects the damage and effectiveness of most spells. Constitution increases your health and also grants some physical resistance. The health is most important for blood magic spellcasting, but also to increase Velanna's survivability since she will be in the front line. The extra physical resistance is also nice since it can help prevent physical effects like stuns or knockdowns. As for the willpower, you just want it for the extra mana, but not too much of it. You will likely also get some bonuses to mana or willpower from gear, and the Stoic passive from the Battle Mage specialization should help keep it topped up. So that's why you only need a fairly low base of 20 to 25. For recommended skills, there's only 4 skills that matter for combat. Combat Training is a crucial skill that allows your mage to take less damage before their spellcasting gets interrupted. Velanna won't be casting too many spells that have a longer conjuration time, but it's still good to have this protection from being interrupted. I recommend picking up the first 2 ranks of this skill because you also get a plus 0.5 bonus to your combat mana regeneration from the second rank. You don't need the other 2 ranks unless you run out of things to spend your points on. Combat Tactics should absolutely be maxed out as soon as possible after getting the first 2 ranks of Combat Training because you need all the extra tactic slots you can get in order to be able to set up Velanna's tactics. You will need a base score of 16 Cunning for the skill, so remember to put a few points into Cunning if Velanna doesn't already have it at 16, or if you specialize her. Vitality is also very important for a Blood Mage because it increases the character's health by 25 points per rank. Max this out since as a Blood Mage you'll be using your health to cast spells, and you'll also appreciate the extra HP for survivability. Clarity is the final skill relevant for combat. It increases your mana by 25 points per rank. You don't need to unlock all 4 ranks of this one because you only need enough mana to sustain spells and for Draining Aura to have what to take away when it damages enemies. The first 2 ranks should be a good enough bonus of plus 50 mana, but of course, if you have the points to spare once you got everything else you needed or wanted, the other 2 ranks of Clarity are nice to have. I already mentioned this in the starting skills section, but Herbalism is potentially something you want to max out, mainly for the purpose of crafting the Master Lyrium potion for Wade to make the Golem Shell armor, though of course if you feel like you need high-tier potions, it's cheaper to craft them yourself. Moving on to recommended abilities. From the Entropy tree, unlock Weakness, Paralyze, Miasma, Death Hex, and Death Cloud. Weakness inflicts penalties of -10 attack and defense to one target and has a chance to reduce its movement speed unless it passes a physical resistance check. This is usually not worth using because a -10 penalty isn't very noticeable. But if you have other effects that also debuff enemies' attack or defense like Miasma, a champion's Warcry, an archer's crippling shot, or suppressing fire, then combining weakness with these makes the debuff far better on an elite or boss rank enemy. Paralyze disables an enemy with a paralysis effect for a duration unless it passes a physical resistance check, in which case its movement speed is reduced instead. Any spell that can disable enemies is great, and paralysis in particular is very strong because unlike with stuns, sleep, or knockdown, no enemies are immune to paralysis, even bosses. If you get lucky, you could paralyze even the most dangerous foes. Miasma is a sustained spell that grants penalties of -10 attack and defense to all enemies around the caster, and also has a chance to reduce their movement speed unless they pass a physical resistance check. This is perfect for Velanna since she wants to be close to enemies to cast her damaging spells, and the debuff of Miasma will also help your entire party. Another benefit of this spell is that it draws a lot of threat onto the caster, so enemies will be more likely to target Velanna, and if they are melee fighters, they will be super easy to kill once they get in range of Velanna's various self-centered AoE damage spells. Death Hex curses an enemy, causing all the normal hits they suffer to be turned into critical hits. This can even turn the regular attacks of a dual wielder with dual striking, or an archer with rapid shot into guaranteed crits, because the crit chance on a death-hexed target is 100% minus the attacker's current crit chance. So the lower your base crit chance, the more likely you are to crit on a death-hex-affected enemy. This is great if you have a lot of physical damages on your team, especially ones using these sustained talents. I personally love dual striking builds, so I recommend this as a buff to such a build if one of your other characters is using it. If you want to use Death Hex with Death Cloud for the Entropic Death spell combo, cast the Hex on a high health enemy like an elite or boss, then cast Death Cloud on top of them. The Hex will be dispelled, and the target will immediately take an insane amount of spirit damage. The base damage without any spell power is 200, and to that base you add double your current spell power. This will one-shot a lot of enemies. Some elite bosses can resist this effect and only take the normal damage from Death Cloud, but regular bosses should still be affected. Death Cloud deals spirit damage over time to all creatures in an area for 30 seconds. Friendly fire is possible, but since there's no secondary effect, your allies should be fine as long as they can heal themselves. The damage per tick is quite small, though if you have high spell power and maxed out bonuses to spirit damage, it adds up. And of course, the more impressive use of this spell is to combine it with Death Hex for the Entropic Death spell combo. From the Keeper specialization, unlock all other 3 abilities. Thornblades is an activated spell you can cast if you have One with Nature active. It causes roots to appear on the ground that deal physical damage to all enemies within the field created by One with Nature. The physical damage from Thornblades isn't mitigated by armor at all, so this will melt even through highly armored enemies. Replenishment is a passive that causes the mage to be healed for 20% of the damage they inflict through One with Nature. When an enemy dies within the field of One with Nature, the corpse is consumed, giving the mage a plus 20 health regen bonus for 6 seconds, which is very nice. This also means that if you're using One with Nature, you don't need to have Death Magic active, since the corpses will automatically be consumed by One with Nature for health regen purposes. The best part about this healing is that it's technically health regeneration, not an actual healing effect, so even with Blood Magic active, you will still get the full effect of this health restoration. This is why after you start using One with Nature and unlock Replenishment, you shouldn't use Death Magic anymore. Nature's Vengeance deals huge amounts of physical damage to all enemies in a 10-meter radius around the caster. This damage isn't mitigated by armor just like the one from Thornblades. There's also a chance to impale the enemies for 5 seconds unless they pass a physical resistance check. The damage from this spell is huge. Even just the base damage without any extra spell power is already 150, and there's no way for enemies to reduce it. The spell is fairly expensive, costing 100 mana or health before factoring in fatigue, plus the cooldown is very long, 1 minute. So you need to have a high health pool to comfortably cast this with Blood Magic, though with the improved Blood Magic effect from an equipped item, the health cost will be reduced by 25%, so it's actually easier to cast this as a Blood Mage. Speaking of, the second specialization I recommend for Velanna is Blood Mage. Unlocking this specialization grants +2 Constitution and +2 Spell Power, which are great bonuses. I recommend picking up the first 3 abilities, the first one as soon as possible. Blood Magic is a sustain that causes you to use health instead of mana as a spellcasting resource. Most healing effects on you will be 90% less effective, other than health regeneration and the healing you get from Blood Sacrifice. In order to be able to cast the other spells in this tree, you need to have Blood Magic active. But that's not a problem because Velanna will want to use Blood Magic pretty much all the time, unless her HP gets too low, in which case she'll temporarily disable Blood Magic, use a health pool to then turn it back on. Blood Sacrifice drains up to 50 HP from an ally and heals the caster for 100 HP. The healing from this spell isn't affected by the self-healing debuff of Blood Magic, so it's a great way to keep your Blood Mage healthy without having to turn off Blood Magic. The spell doesn't cost anything to cast and has a low cooldown of only 15 seconds. The best targets to use Blood Sacrifice on are a ranger summon, like the bear, or an ally with very high HP who won't mind losing 50 health. Plus, you can always use the heal spell on them after using Blood Sacrifice. Blood Wound deals a large amount of spirit damage over time to all enemies in a 10-meter sphere and also has a chance to immobilize them unless they pass a physical resistance check. The spirit damage is dealt over 10 seconds. Demons, undead, and golems are immune to this spell since they don't have blood, but everyone else is fair game. This is probably the best base game AoE spell due to both dealing huge amounts of damage and also providing a disabling effect in an area. So be sure to use this quite frequently on groups of enemies, especially because the spell has a fairly low 20-second cooldown. But of course, against demons, undead, and golems, use another damaging spell like Fireball or your physical damage keeper spells. The final specialization I recommend unlocking at level 21 is the Battle Mage. The bonuses you get from choosing Battle Mage are +2 magic and +0.25 combat health regeneration. I recommend unlocking the first 3 abilities. Don't unlock the 4th one because it's a weaker version of the first spell that deals damage of a random element, which could be something shitty that enemies are immune to. Draining Aura is a sustain that deals spirit damage to all enemies in the sphere around the mage and also heals the caster for some of the damage dealt. The damage bursts happen every 4 seconds, and whenever an enemy is damaged, 30 mana is drained from the caster, unaffected by fatigue. The mana drain shouldn't be a problem because you'll be getting a lot of mana back from getting damaged, aka casting spells with Blood Magic, once you have the Stoic passive. The healing from Draining Aura won't help you because you're using Blood Magic, but you already have ways to regenerate health with the corpses consumed by One with Nature and the healing from Blood Sacrifice. Hand of Winter deals cold damage to all enemies in a 7.5 meter radius around the mage, freezing them if they fail a physical resistance check. The damage scales with spell power, and the base freeze duration is a huge 10 seconds, adjusted by enemy rank, but it's still a lot, though bosses can't be frozen. The freeze can enable the shattering combo on elite or lower rank enemies if you hit them with Stone Fist or a critical hit, killing them immediately. This is amazing to use whenever Velanna is surrounded by multiple enemies to lock them in place so you can cast another damaging spell to kill them. The Stoic passive is extremely useful for Velanna because it restores some of the mage's mana whenever they get damaged. The mana restored is equal to 50% of the damage taken. Since Velanna is in the middle of the fray, she will get damaged quite a bit by enemies, but more importantly, the self-damage from blood magic spellcasting also triggers this effect, so you'll definitely have enough mana to keep Draining Aura going, even if enemies don't manage to hit you much. These are the main spells you care about in the build. I will also mention a few optional abilities to unlock after you've gotten all of these if you end up at a higher level than 30. From the Arcane Tree, you could also unlock Fade Shield, Elemental Mastery, Attunement, and Time Spiral. Fade Shield is a passive that grants the mage plus 5% spell resistance and dodge chance, and also upgrades the Arcane Shield spell with an extra 15% dodge chance and spell resistance while it's active. We don't really care about Arcane Shield for this build since defense isn't a high priority stat, though I guess you could use it since the Stoic passive is going to restore your mana whenever you cast spells through blood magic, so you don't need to get hit often. Elemental Mastery is a sustained spell that grants the mage plus 15% to all elemental damage types. It has a high cost to sustain, 100 mana in reserve plus 10% fatigue, so I don't recommend using this. You can easily get to the maximum plus 50% bonus or close to it for 2 elements, Fire and Spirit, so this is not needed. But you need this in order to unlock the other 2 abilities in the row. Attunement is a passive that grants the mage plus 10 magic, plus 10 willpower, and plus 2 combat mana regeneration. You mostly care about the magic for the extra spell power. The willpower is nice for more mana to be used by a Draining Aura and the other sustained spells, but the spell power is the main thing that Velanna cares about as a blood mage, so that's why this isn't included in the main build as a priority. It's not as useful as it is for regular mages who use mana as their main resource. Time Spiral resets all the cooldowns of your spells, not including itself. It has a 2-minute cooldown, so you'll likely only use this once in a fight, but it can be amazing if you use it immediately after using spells that deal large amounts of damage and or disable enemies, and which potentially have a longer cooldown, like Hand of Winter, Nature's Vengeance, Thornblades, and Paralyze. You can immediately cast them again with Time Spiral, which can cause you to absolutely obliterate entire groups of enemies in like 10 to 20 seconds. But you'll have to use it manually because there's no real way to set it up in tactics. If you still have points to spare after this, you could pick up Arcane Shield from the Arcane Tree if you want the extra defense it provides. The other 2 passives in that row are decent as well. Staff Focus increases the damage of your staff's basic attacks. You're mainly using spells for damage though, so you don't care that much about your basic attacks. And Arcane Mastery gives you plus 5 spell power, which is nice, but certainly not as good as the Attunement passive. But if you have the extra points, you might as well pick it up. Finally, you could also pick up Force Field from the Spirit Tree, which immobilizes a target and also makes them immune to all damage for the duration. Friendly Fire is possible, and in fact, it's a great idea to use this spell as a defensive option to protect your mage or your other allies when they're in danger. An ally affected by Curse of Mortality, who is too low health to be able to survive it, can be saved with Force Field, as can an ally being damaged by an unavoidable enemy ability like a Grab or Overwhelm. You can also dispel Crushing Prison from an ally with this, though this creates the Shockwave combo, which damages and knocks down all nearby targets, including your own allies, so sometimes it may be best to just let Crushing Prison dissipate on its own to avoid knocking down your other allies. You can also use this spell offensively against a particularly dangerous enemy if you want to temporarily immobilize them to kill other lesser enemies first. There's other decent spells you can pick up, like Crushing Prison at the end of the row with Mind Blast and Force Field, but if I mentioned every decent spell, we'd be here all day. Moving on to recommended gear. As part of recommending items for Awakening, I'll only recommend items you can obtain in Awakening. If you have a strong item from importing your Origins Warden, you can use it if it has stats similar to the good Awakening items. But I can't recommend DAO items because you don't always import your Warden, and even if you do, it's not guaranteed you'll have every item in your inventory. I may mention something from DAO if I think it would be particularly nice, or if Awakening doesn't have enough good options. But you'll have to figure out whether an Origins item is good enough for the build. To make that easier, I'll explain the main bonuses to look for. On staves, you mainly want spell power or magic, and elemental damage bonuses, spirit or fire. Each staff has a certain damage type for its basic attacks, physical or elemental. You may prefer a certain element to deal extra damage to enemies that are weak to that element, avoid using an element they're highly resistant or immune to, or else just choose a physical damage staff that's good against everyone. But Velanna will be using damaging spells pretty much non-stop, so she doesn't really care about her basic attacks, so you're free to choose whichever staff has the best bonuses. For armor, the good offensive bonuses are magic, spell power, and possibly an elemental damage bonus. In the beginning, before you start using blood magic, you can look for mana regeneration, mana, and willpower bonuses, but when you want to start using blood magic, look for health and constitution bonuses if you can, to have a higher health pool for spellcasting. For defensive stats, the main one I recommend is armor, though spell resistance, dodge, chance, and defense are all nice. For accessories, you mostly prefer offensive bonuses to spell power and potentially elemental damage, but constitution, health, and health regen bonuses here are also great for more health to cast spells with, as well as survivability. Now that you know the general stats to look for on gear, here are my specific gear recommendations. For weapons, here are the 3 best staves. Staff of Vigor is a tier 9 physical staff that grants +5 constitution, +1 combat health regen, +10 spell power, and it has a -0.3 second rapid aim bonus. You can loot it from a Hurlock emissary in the main hall of Kal Haral during the last of the Legion main quest. It has decent bonuses to spell power and also offers +25 health from the constitution, as well as +1 health regen, but the health regen situation will most of the time be taken care of by consuming corpses with One with Nature, so it's not as important. And you can get better spell power from the other 2 staves I recommend. Spell Fury is a tier 9 physical staff that grants +4 to all attributes, a -0.4 second rapid aim, +1 combat mana regen, and +20 spell power. It's absolutely amazing due to the huge spell power bonus. You're still getting some extra health as well from the bonuses to all attributes, just 5 less health than the Staff of Vigor. However, while it's a great staff, it's also very expensive. You can buy it from Octham the Grocer in Amaranthine for 172 gold and a half. So you'll have to decide whether you think this staff is worth spending your limited gold on. Finally, Staff of the Lost is a tier 9 physical staff that grants +10 magic, +15% spirit resistance, +15 spell power, +75 stamina, aka mana, and +50% spirit damage. This has slightly more spell power than Spell Fury, 25 instead of 24, and also gives you the maximum bonus for spirit damage. Since you're using quite a few spirit damage spells, especially Draining Aura, Blood Wound, and possibly the Entropic Death combo, maxing out your bonus to spirit damage is perfect. So this is my top staff for this build. You can loot this from the Lost and the Kal Haral lower reaches during the main quest, Last of the Legion. Moving on to armor, you'll see that Awakening doesn't really have good robes for a Blood Mage, so the best thing you can get from Awakening specifically is extra spell power, or optionally a robe with improved blood magic if you don't have the Sash of Forbidden Secrets belt. Blood Promise grants +3 willpower, +3 magic, +0.25 combat mana regen, +6 armor, and improves blood magic, aka spells cost 25% less health to cast. You can loot this from the Abandoned Warehouse as part of the Freedom for Anders questline in Amaranthine. The only reason I recommend this is if you don't have another item granting improves blood magic, like the Sash of Forbidden Secrets, but if you do, don't use this robe. Vestments of the Seer grant +10 willpower, +7 magic, +10 armor, and +10% spell resistance. These are a DLC-related item you should have in your inventory from the beginning of the game if you got an achievement in the Witch Hunt DLC. These are the best robes you can get in Awakening, having the same overall spell power as Velanna's starting robes, but also extra armor, spell resistance, and willpower. Spellminder is a decent robe that grants +8 magic, +1 combat mana regen, and +8 armor. You can loot it from the Queen of the Black Marsh, an optional boss you can defeat after completing the main quest in the Black Marsh and collecting all the pieces of Dragon Bone. It's not as good as Vestments of the Seer, but in case you don't have the vestments, but don't need the improved blood magic from Blood Promise, this is an upgrade over Velanna's starting robe. Because there aren't many good robes in Awakening, I will recommend one from Origins if you are importing your Warden. Reaper's Vestments, which grant +6 Constitution, +20% fire resistance, +16% spell resistance, +10% dodge chance, and +12 armor. You can purchase them in Origins from the Wonders of Thedas in Denerim. While they don't have bonuses to magic or spell power, the extra Constitution, armor, and defensive bonuses are perfect for this build. For helmets, there are barely any mage helms to talk about, unfortunately. Only one is great, the others kind of suck. Toque of the Oblivious grants plus 10 magic, plus 5 armor, plus 10% spell resistance, and plus 10 mental and physical resistance. This is really great on any short range or melee mage due to the bonus to armor, spell resistance, and physical resistance, and of course, the bonus to magic means an extra 10 spell power, which is good for all mage builds. You can loot this from the Queen of the Black Marsh, the optional boss you can fight after completing the main quest in the Black Marsh if you collect all the dragon bones. The other 3 helms that are decent are first Enchanter's Cowl, which grants plus 4 magic and plus 25 stamina, aka mana. You can loot this from the locked chest in the Architect's Room in the Silverite Mine during the Righteous Path quest. You need a key for it, and you can only get it if you persuade Sarani to help you, for which you need Master Coercion on your Warden. Collective Arming Cowl grants plus 2 Constitution and can be purchased in Origins from Bodan in the Party Camp, or in Awakening from Octham in Amaranthine. If nothing else, the plus 10 health from this is decent for blood magic spellcasting. Lucky Cap is okay, granting plus 2 armor and plus 7 mental and physical resistance. You can buy this from Octham in Amaranthine for 1 gold and almost 25 silver, though I'd choose one of the other 3 helms personally. For gloves, you're interested in bonuses to fire or spirit damage. If you're using Staff of the Lost, you already hit the cap for spirit damage, so choose fire. If you don't need any bonus to an element, then go for the one good pair of defensive gloves available to mages. Cinderfell Gauntlets are tier 6 mage gloves that grant plus 20% fire damage. You can buy these from Octham in Amaranthine for 6 gold. Blackhand Gauntlets are tier 6 mage gloves that grant plus 20% spirit damage. You can also buy them from Octham for 6 gold. Lorekeeper's Mittens are tier 8 mage gloves that grant plus 3 constitution and plus 15% cold resistance. You can loot these from the Abandoned Warehouse during the Freedom for Anders quest. They're part of the Lorekeeper's Cloth set, but most of the pieces in the set are bad, and the set bonus isn't amazing either, so use these on their own. Don't bother spending a huge amount of gold on the Oven Mitts or Spirit of the Woods gloves that Octham has for sale. They're not worth it. For boots, the fact that they are all defensive is good for Velanna because she wants to be tankier as a short-range mage. Mostly, I recommend extra armor and constitution, and there is one particular pair of boots that is perfect for this build. However, you can also choose something with high defense or dodge chance, since Velanna will activate the Stoic passive for mana regeneration by damaging herself with blood magic spellcasting, so you can give her stats that make her avoid enemy attacks as well. Still, the best boots by far for her are the Winter Boots, tier 9 mage boots that grant plus 8 constitution, plus 15 defense, plus 2 armor, and plus 40% cold resistance. You can buy them from Octham in Amaranthine for 133 gold and 32 silver. These are absolutely worth it, unlike the shitty expensive gloves. The only other boots I recommend from Awakening are Lorekeeper's Boots, which grant plus 2 dexterity, plus 6 defense, and plus 15% electricity resistance. You can loot them from the Abandoned Warehouse during the Freedom for Anders quest. Don't bother using the full set though, because as I said, it's not that good. You could also snatch Anders' starting boots, the Magus War Boots, away from him. They are tier 7 mage boots that grant plus 12 defense, and since Anders will stay farther away from enemies, he doesn't really need the extra defense. If you think 12 defense is better than the dodge chance you get from Velanna's starting boots, these are decent. Moving on to accessories, there is one ideal belt, the Sash of Forbidden Secrets. It grants plus 6 willpower, plus 6 spell power, plus 15 mental resistance, and improves blood magic. Spells cost 25% less health to cast. This is a belt you can unlock and have in your inventory from the beginning of the game if you kill the Harvester on any difficulty in the Golems of Amgarak DLC. It's amazing for a blood mage due to increasing spell power and having the blood magic bonus. This blood magic bonus doesn't stack with itself, so you only need one source of it, and the sash is the best item for it. If you don't have the sash, you'll need the blood magic effect on another item, like the Blood Promise robes I mentioned earlier. Here are the 2 belts that are good if you don't have the sash. Lucrosian's Silken Cord grants plus 2 magic and plus 4 constitution, and can be looted from a locked chest in the Vigil's Keep courtyard during the first mission of the game. It's decent as far as free items go, especially since you get it so early, but it's not as good as the sash or the next belt in terms of spell power. You may prefer it for the extra constitution though. Battle Mage's Cinch grants plus 5 willpower and plus 5 spell power, and can be looted from the Lost in the Kalharal lower reaches as part of the Last of Legion main quest. A solid mage belt for any build. For amulets, there's a few good ones, but I have a top pick for a blood mage specifically. Scout's Medal grants plus 2 dexterity, plus 10 constitution, plus 2 armor, and plus 50 stamina, aka mana. You can buy it from Uriah in the throne room of Vigil's Keep for 84 gold and 13 silver. This is perfect for a blood mage due to the extra health and armor. The extra mana is of course decent for the purpose of keeping various spells sustained, as well as having some mana to cast spells with if you need to deactivate blood magic to heal. If you don't want to use Scout's Medal, here are two other decent amulets. Seeker's Chain grants +2 to all attributes, +1 combat health regen, and +3 defense. You can buy it from Glassrick and Amaranthine for 10 gold and a half. Illumination grants +3 to all attributes and +10 mental resistance and can be obtained by completing the Wending Wood stone puzzle. Finally, for rings, the best one has a huge bonus to spell power. Otherwise, you can get rings with decent spell power, bonuses to a specific element, or rings that grant health or constitution. Ring of Mastery grants +10 spell power and can be looted from Adria in the basement of Vigil's Keep as you follow the side quest It Comes From Beneath. It's an amazing free ring for any mage. Ash grants +10% fire resistance and +20% fire damage and can be looted from a Darkspawn corpse in the Wending Wood. It's nice if you want to increase Velanna's fire damage, but I recommend focusing on health or spell power instead. Soulbound grants +50% spirit resistance, +20% spell resistance, and +100% spirit damage. You can loot it in the Black Marsh from the remains of the Baroness. The problem is that the +100 bonus to spirit damage is overkill. The maximum cap in Awakening is +50%, so you're getting more than you need and it doesn't apply the extra bonus in any way, even if enemies have high spirit resistance or something like that. Plus, you likely already have a bonus to spirit damage from your gloves or staff, so I don't really recommend this for Velanna, unless you specifically choose a staff and gloves that don't increase your spirit damage at all. If you just want to increase your spell power and don't care about elemental damage bonuses or health and constitution, then Golden Cog is a decent second ring to pair with the Ring of Mastery. It grants +4 willpower and +4 magic. Obviously, nowhere near the +10 spell power of the Ring of Mastery, but better than Velanna's starting ring. However, I personally recommend choosing a second ring that increases your health pool. Tingler grants +4 constitution, +0.75 combat health regen, and +15% to healing effects received. The healing effect bonus doesn't work in the base game, but is properly implemented if you have Dane's Fixes. If you don't have the Life Giver ring from Origins, then this is a very solid second ring to use on Velanna for extra health and health regen. Speaking of, Life Giver is the ring from Origins I recommend. It grants +10 constitution, +3 combat health regen, +10 exploration health regen, +3 armor, and +20% to healing effects received. The healing effect bonus is bugged, but it works properly if you have Dane's Fixes. You can buy this in Origins from Garen in the Orzammar Commons for 87 gold and 88 silver. It's the best ring you can give to a blood mage for the +50 health and extra health regen, as well as the armor for protection in this short-range build. So if you have it from importing your Warden, I 100% recommend giving it to Velanna. When it comes to runes and consumables, unfortunately due to being a classic mage that uses a staff and cloth armor, Velanna can't use any runes. And other than health poultices and lyrium potions, I don't recommend any particular consumable items. The only extra potions that might be useful situationally would be elemental resistance ones for specific boss fights, like an elixir of grounding against the Queen of the Black Marsh for electricity resistance, and a warmth balm against the Inferno Golem for fire resistance. Let's move on to tactics and party composition. In terms of party composition, I always recommend having one tank in the party and at least one ranged character, whether archer or mage. By tank, I generally mean a warrior who can use Threaten and Taunt, and in Awakening, Grievous Insult for the purpose of keeping enemies attacking them instead of their squishier party members. You could get away with an Arcane Warrior tank as long as they're doing a lot of damage and drawing a lot of threat with spells like Draining Aura and Miasma. You have to remember that Velanna will be using these two spells herself, so she will draw a significant amount of enemy aggression onto herself. She wants a lot of enemies to come near her, so in this case, you may not necessarily want a tank in the party as long as you feel like you can keep Velanna alive. This is because a tank would draw enemies away from her, and that means she won't be using her keeper spells as often. In any case, I do recommend having a tanky character in the party with a high health pool that Velanna can use blood sacrifice on to heal herself. They don't have to be a full tank, just have a lot of HP. I recommend 1 or 2 ranged characters because you can start damaging enemies that are far away earlier. Plus, if you have a full melee party, they will get stuck in doorways and cramped areas when fighting, and that will cause them to take more damage and be in awkward positions while they try to get unstuck. So have at least 1 ranged character, if not 2, to avoid these positioning problems. Velanna is technically a ranged damager, since she doesn't have to be strictly in melee range, but she wants to be close to enemies most of the time for her keeper spells and other self-centered spells to affect as many enemies as possible. So I wouldn't count her as a ranged character. It would be best to have an archer or a second mage who stays at range, like Nathaniel or Anders. That's all the advice I have for party compositions though, because first and foremost, it's important to choose the party that you feel comfortable playing, and which includes the companions you like. My recommendations are just suggestions based on my experience and playstyle preferences. For Velanna's tactics, because she has access to so many spells, some of which need 2 tactics to be used properly, she needs a ton of tactic slots, which is why I recommend maxing out the combat tactics skill. First, let's talk about the sustain spells. The ones to keep active at all times are Miasma, Rock Armor, and Draining Aura. To set these 3 spells up, just choose Self, Any, Activate Ability X. You would also do this for Arcane Shield if you decide you want to use it. Now we'll discuss the sustained abilities that are either optional or which need a bit more care when setting up. Flaming Weapons is optional because you may not have a party composition that can take advantage of it. If you have 3 or 4 ranged characters, whether using bows or staves, Flaming Weapons won't be useful enough because it only adds fire damage to melee attacks. So only use this if you have 2 or more melee characters, and set it up to be active at all times like the first 3 sustains if so. Death magic is only usable when you aren't using blood magic. It consumes nearby corpses to restore your HP. Obviously, due to the extremely reduced healing effectiveness of blood magic, death magic doesn't work with it. Plus, you want One with Nature to consume the corpses instead anyway, because it will give you health regen. If you're going to use death magic at all, it will only be in the early game before you start using blood magic. After that, remove it from your tactics and from your ability bar since it will become obsolete. Blood magic needs 2 tactic slots. One to activate when Velanna is above 80% HP, and one to deactivate it when Velanna is under 30 or 20% HP, whichever you feel comfortable with. Immediately after these 2 tactics, add a tactic for Velanna to use a health poultice if her HP is below 30 or 20%, whichever percentage you chose to deactivate blood magic at. Ensure this health poultice tactic is underneath the blood magic ones, so that Velanna deactivates the spell first and then heals herself. It is possible you could remove the tactics of deactivating blood magic and using a health poultice if you're comfortable using blood sacrifice often on your allies to keep Velanna's HP up. If blood sacrifice plus any health regen she gets from gear and from One with Nature is enough to keep her healthy, then you only need a tactic that activates blood magic. Finally, the last sustain you need to set up is One with Nature. It would be best to control Velanna manually in general, but especially for One with Nature, it's easier to get Velanna into a good position to use it, as well as deactivate it later. But it can be used automatically by the follower AI, it just needs 2 tactic slots. One that activates One with Nature when Velanna is surrounded by at least 3 enemies, and one that deactivates One with Nature if Velanna is surrounded by no enemies. For the active spells, you won't have super many slots left, so you'll have to choose the ones with the highest value for Velanna's tactics. The best active spells, in my opinion, are Paralyze, Blood Wound, Fireball, Thornblades, Nature's Vengeance, Hand of Winter, and Blood Sacrifice. Paralyze should be used on an elite or higher rank enemy. No enemy is immune to paralysis effects as far as I know, so it's worth using this on these high rank enemies in case they fail the check. Blood Wound is by far the best AoE damaging spells other than against undead demons and golems who are immune because they don't have blood. Even enemies resistant to spirit damage can be made weak to this by using one of the hexes that reduce elemental resistances. Set it up in your tactics to be used against an enemy clustered together with 2 allies. The same tactic can also be applied to Fireball. Do be careful with Fireball, however, because it can knock down Velanna or the rest of your party if they're in the radius, unless they're immune to knockdown or have very high physical resistance. So you might want to skip putting Fireball in the automatic tactics if you aren't sure whether your party members will manage to stay upright if they're hit by it. Thornblades will only be cast if One with Nature is already active. Set Thornblades to be used if Velanna is surrounded by at least 2 enemies. This is because there might be a small delay between when Velanna casts One with Nature and when she casts Thornblades, so you still want for there to be a chance for her to cast it while One with Nature is still active. Apply the same tactic for Nature's Vengeance. I also recommend setting the exact same tactic for Hand of Winter, since it also affects enemies in the circle around you and can help immobilize them. The best thing would be to add the Hand of Winter tactic higher up the list, above the Thornblades and Nature's Vengeance behaviors, just so you first immobilize the enemies surrounding you in order to keep them in place for the other 2 damaging spells, if they're still needed. These area spells around you, Thornblades, Nature's Vengeance, Hand of Winter, together with Draining Aura and One with Nature, should absolutely shred through any enemies that come near Velanna or any enemies she runs up to. Blood Sacrifice is best used on a particular party member that you know has very high HP, like a warrior or maybe Sigrun if she has very high health, and who won't mind to take 50 points of damage. The best way to set this up to ensure it's only used on that particular ally is to choose that party member. If their HP is above 70 or 80%, use Blood Sacrifice on them. As long as that tanky party member gets healed with poultices or spells, they'll be fine, and using Blood Sacrifice fairly often should ensure that Velanna can keep blood magic active most of the time without needing to deactivate it to use a health poultice. I'll also mention Heal here as a final great value spell if you have the space for it in your tactics. Set it up to be used on an ally if their health is below 40%. If you don't have the space for it in tactics, at least remember you can use it in an emergency manually. The next active spells are good but not crucial. Stone Fist, Mind Blast, Vulnerability Hex, Affliction Hex, Death Hex, Death Cloud, Curse of Mortality, and potentially Time Spiral. Stone Fist is best used on an enemy that is frozen or petrified to try to shatter them. If you don't have cold spells on another mage in the party, and don't think you'd get a lot of value out of using Stone Fist on an enemy affected by Hand of Winter, then use this against a high priority target you want to disable, like a spellcaster. I don't recommend using this on elites or bosses, because most of the time they'll be highly resistant or immune to knockdown. Use Mind Blast when Velanna is surrounded by 2 or more enemies to stun them. Since you already have Hand of Winter, which both damages and freezes enemies, Mind Blast is a secondary option, just in case some enemies resist the freeze, or if Hand of Winter is on cooldown. Vulnerability Hex and or Affliction Hex should only be used on elite and higher rank enemies. Normal or critter enemies die very easily, so you don't need to reduce their elemental resistances. But honestly, unless that particular elite or boss is highly resistant to a particular element you're using to damage them, you don't really need to use these hexes. They can be useful, but they're far better left out of your tactics and only used manually against a handful of enemies whose reduced resistances actually matter. Death Hex and Death Cloud are spells I recommend using together manually on an elite or boss enemy for the Entropic Death combo to deal tons of spirit damage to them immediately. Death Cloud on its own isn't as powerful as your other AoE spells. Death Hex, however, can be used on its own, even added to your tactics, to target elite or higher rank enemies, but only do this if you have a physical damager on your team that has a low or 0 crit chance normally and who would appreciate critting all the time, like a dual wielder with dual striking. Time Spiral is difficult to set up in your tactics since you have no way of checking which spells are on cooldown so you can reset them. So I recommend to just check in on Velanna a couple of times during a boss fight to see if any of her super high value spells like Paralyze or the Keeper spells are on cooldown, and if they are, and she could use them at that moment to deal tons of damage, cast Time Spiral to make them available. After that, you can switch back to your usual character and let Velanna use her regular tactics. As a final good spell to add to your tactics, or remember to use manually sometimes, Curse of Mortality is best used against enemy spellcasters, aka enemies using magic attacks. It will prevent them from healing and thus make them a lot easier to kill. Finally, here are the spells I don't recommend adding to your tactics at all, and which generally aren't worth using for this build. Flame Blast is very nice AoE damage in a cone in front of you, but it's best used manually, both to ensure your allies aren't caught in the area if possible, and also because if you set it up in tactics to be used against an enemy within short range, it might only be used against a single enemy instead of a group. That would be a waste of resources and time, since this should always be used against a small line or cluster of enemies. Don't bother using Inferno because it has a longer casting time and you already have amazing AoE damage spells like Fireball and Blood Wound and Hand of Winter, not to mention the Keeper spells. Misdirection Hex just debuffs the one enemy to miss most of their attacks, which just isn't good enough. You can just disable the enemy or straight up kill them with some burst damage instead. Weakness reduces the attack and defense of an enemy and potentially reduces their movement speed, but you already have other sources of this debuff, and let's be fair, in Awakening you deal so much damage that taking the time to cast this spell isn't worth it when you can be casting a damaging spell instead. Drain Life is a perfectly fine single target damaging spell for regular mages, but since Velanna is using blood magic, the healing from this is barely anything, and the damage isn't high enough either compared to the other damaging spells this build has access to, so it doesn't need to be used. Arcane Bolt is also a perfectly fine single target damage spell for regular mages, especially due to its long range, but as a short range mage focusing more on area damage, Velanna doesn't need this, so that's why I recommend skipping it if you respecialize her. Walking Bomb is technically more useful than these other two damaging spells since it does deal area damage with its explosion, but you have stronger AoE damage, especially from Velanna's Keeper specialization, that Walking Bomb doesn't feel worth using anymore. The only situation I'd use it in is if you're planning to freeze an enemy with a second mage, since you could shatter the enemy to cause the explosion immediately after. In conclusion, Velanna is an absolute monster with her damage if you lean into her Keeper specialization and entropy spells and add blood magic on top of that. This has got to be among the highest damaging builds I've made to date, together with Sigrun's build. Part of this is because the new abilities and specializations in Awakening are extremely powerful and make the game much easier, but it's also because Awakening is an advanced campaign, so you're already doing higher damage just from being higher level and having more attribute points. Still, it can feel super fun to destroy enemies in Awakening, so why not lean fully into it by creating an extremely powerful Blood Mage Keeper? I was initially trying to avoid the Blood Mage specialization for Velanna, because it felt a bit weird to make the only other Dalish companion a Blood Mage, since Meryl in DA2 is also a Blood Mage. But no matter how long I thought about how to change the build, I kept coming back to Blood Magic and how well it would work with what Velanna starts with. I really like this build, I think it fits her very well, but let me know what you think if you try this one out for yourself. I hope you found this build guide for Velanna in Dragon Age Origins Awakening useful. If you enjoyed this, stick around for future guides and other videos I plan to make about Dragon Age and other games I care about. Feel free to leave a like, comment, subscribe, or maybe become a channel member. Everything helps. This has been B Tier Mutineer. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.